Alright, so I wanted to comment on this video, this TED Talk of this guy talking about karma. And I just want to respond with what the Bible would have to say concerning this matter. So I just want to reflect on that. But let's take some time and watch it and go from there.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is karma. Karma is the Buddhist or Hindu belief in the fundamental law of the universe, that what we put out into it, both positive and negative, will come back to us. Traditionally, it takes the form of a sort of cosmic scorecard that's tracking us, our actions, both positive and negative, so that we can be rewarded or punished appropriately when next we reincarnate. I believe that karma is real, but not because there may or may not be some supernatural force watching over us, ready to reward or punish us later, but because there is a direct, observable cause and effect relationship between the actions we take on a day-to-day basis and the rewards or punishments we receive, and our overall quality of life.
Okay, so I wanted to comment on this video here. So right at the beginning, I just want to share that the Bible does not teach karma. It doesn't teach that. Christians often use the phrase, they'll say, oh, karma, oh, it's karma, it's karma. The Bible doesn't teach karma. So first of all, there's that. That being said, you see in the Old Testament the doctrine of retribution. And the doctrine of retribution is simple. Suffering is the result of sin. So because God is just in his ordered world, the righteous will be blessed and the wicked will suffer. Okay, so in the book of Proverbs, for example, the predominant theme is that God blesses those who are wise and righteous, but he punishes those who are foolish and wicked. So that's the doctrine of retribution. But what we learn from the story of Job is that even though there is the doctrine of retribution, this doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions to the rule. Okay, so that's what you learn from the story of Job. So Job, if you know about him, was a fantastic individual. If you read the first 3 chapters of Job, what are you meant to see? You're meant to see that Job's goodness was legendary. So God highlights Job's goodness again and again. God's verdict upon Job was that he was righteous, that he was blameless. So Job is an innocent man, and yet he suffers tremendously throughout the book. He faces terrible things, devastating series of events. His health, goes away. His wealth is lost. His children die. All 10 of his children. Forget about the wealth. Forget about the health. His 10 children die. Absolute worst thing that could happen, right? So he faces this terrible series of events. And then he has some friends come along. There's 4 friends, but we're going to talk just about 3 of them. So 3 of these friends sit down with him, and they're chatting with him. Or they're sitting down, and they're not chatting. They're just sitting with him in his grief. One of the best things that they could have done. But eventually, after some time, they start speaking up. And they start reminding Job about the principle of retribution. And they say, Job, where there's smoke, there's fire, buddy. Look at all the suffering that you're facing right now. This must mean that you did something bad. Okay, you got a doozy here. You've sinned grievously against God. Because, if you didn't, none of this would be happening to you. In Job, throughout the book, throughout this entire section, as he's dialoguing with his friends, is he's saying, listen, guys, I'm innocent. I'm innocent. I've done nothing wrong. I've done nothing wrong, and all these bad things are happening to me. But you don't have to take Job's words for it. Right there at the beginning of the book, God's verdict upon Job is that he's innocent. So one of the things that we learn is that there is such a thing as innocent suffering. You could get cancer of no fault of your own. You could have someone come into your house and steal everything you have. No fault of your own. You could lose a loved one, lose a child. Terrible thing. Of no fault of your own. Okay? So the idea that if you're suffering, it's because you have done something bad, that's not some fixed formula. There's times in God's plan, under his sovereign banner, that people face difficulty and suffering, and they've not really deserved it. That's the whole point of Job, at least one of the great points of Job. And on the other hand, there are people that get away with wicked stuff, and they die peacefully in their beds. Okay? So, although you see the principle of retribution at work in the world, in the Old Testament and specifically, you see it line up. Even with in the prophet Habakkuk, specifically in chapter 2, he just starts sharing all these judgments, these woes against all these people, because God is sharing with him that eventually his enemies are going to get theirs, right? And the whole point is, eventually God's justice is going to come. It may not be in this life, but it will be in the next life. Habakkuk illustrates for us that the pursuit of evil always ends in disaster, because that is how God has designed it to be. But that justice may not come in this life. So Habakkuk has this song of woes in Habakkuk chapter 2. And they're designed to see that there is this inbuilt retribution in the nature of things. One pastor put it this way, that wickedness always proves to contain the seeds of its own destruction. That God has designed this life in such a way that if you participate in wicked things, it's going to come back to bite you. If you steal something from a grocery store, it's probably going to come back to bite you. Oh, sure, you could get away with it, potentially, but maybe you're going to face that guilt. Or eventually you're going to, face God for it. So eventually you won't get away with it. But in this life, I suppose that you could. But in most cases, how God has designed it is you're going to get caught. You're going to face consequences for what you've done. And on the other side, when you do good things for others, often good things come back at you, right? Even the feeling of joy when you help somebody that's going through a mess or whatever it may be. You give somebody some cash, you give them some groceries, whatever it may be, yeah? Oftentimes when you are doing good, God has designed things in this way that you're going to reap good things. But it doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions to the rule. That's the point. So this whole thing with karma here is not right. Okay? And I wonder, for this individual, what does he do with all of the cases that don't fit in his fixed formula? Job was screaming out to his friends. He was saying, hey, I don't fit into your fixed formula of retribution. Okay? So where am I in all this when I've not done anything wrong? So let's kind of keep going here and see what this guy has to say.
Example, moving. Now, I've relocated about 8 times in the past 8 years. Not quite as many as Tom Hanks. Quickly, show of hands, who here in the audience likes moving to a new and exciting place? I see a few hands. Those of you with your hands up, you're weirdos. Now, show of hands, who here hates moving? My people. I detest moving, but I love helping people move. I get to do a good deed, I get a little bit of exercise, and when I'm doing my 9th relocation in as many years, Tom Hanks, here I come, I have a whole squad of willing recruits at the ready. There's a catch, though. A lot of do-gooders, of those who believe in karma, treat it as a trade where we give to get. The problem is, if you and I give to get, we will always get less than we give. If we give to get, we will always get less than we give. If you and I go out and help, let's say, 10 people move, and we make it clear that we're here to help, but we expect their help in return, most of those people will probably show up on moving day, let's say 8 out of 10. But those people are there not because they want to be, but because they feel obligated. And they will only stay long enough and put in just enough effort to fulfill that obligation. Fair trade? Maybe. What if, instead of a trade, we invest in our karma? What if, instead of a trade, we invest in our karma? What if we go out and help 10 people move, and we make it clear through our words, through our actions, through our attitudes, that we're here not because we necessarily expect something directly in return, but because we want to help. We want to invest in our karma, in our relationships with those 10 people, in making them happier, in making the world around us better. We might not.
So at the end of the day, I'm always just wanting to know, okay, is this true? And why do you believe it's true? He says there's this observable thing that he sees, but his observable thing falls apart because there are exceptions to the rule. So this is why at the end of the book of Job, God comes to Job and he questions him. He batters him with over 70 questions. Hey, where were you when I created the universe? Hey, do you know how, have you been to the bottom of the oceans? Hey, do you know what the purpose is for the ostrich? Right? You know, were you there when I created everything? So he goes through and he just batters him with all these questions, essentially putting him in his place. And the whole thing is, listen, Job, I am so beyond you. There's going to be things that you don't understand. I am in charge. And you're not always going to understand why you suffer. You're not always going to understand why wicked people prosper or why righteous people will suffer. But sometimes it's going to happen. And you have to trust that I have a plan. And Job, he ends the book and he ends that time with God by saying, I repent in dust and ashes. All right. Thank you so much. God bless you in a way.